Welcome to Live with Living Cities, where we spotlight the people, partnerships, and ideas transforming cities and local economies for the better. Today, we sit down with a leader whose work is leaving a meaningful mark, not just on the organizations she's worked with, but on the communities and institutions she continues to influence. I'm Valerie McDowell, Chief of Staff here at Living Cities, and I'll be your guest host today. Joining me is the incredible Ashley Gabb, founder of Gabb Consulting, a former executive at some of the world's most recognized companies, and a trusted advisor to institutions and leaders across industries. Ashley's path has taken her from global corporate leadership to entrepreneurship. And today we're diving into the lessons, turning points, and bold decisions that have shaped her journey. In a time when inclusive leadership and equitable entrepreneurship are more important than ever, Ashley's story offers insight into what it takes to lead with purpose and leave a legacy. Ashley, welcome. We are so glad to have you on Live with Living Cities.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
And before we dive into your incredible journey, I'd love to hear more about you. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and the work you do today?
So I'm just so excited to be here. Thank you again for having me. Again, my name is Ashley Gabb, and what drives me and what's my passion is really advancing equity, creating opportunity, and really aligning impact with purpose. Some of the work that I do really focuses on the Black community, especially creating and driving change that closes the racial wealth gap. So I'm excited to share that I'm the executive director of the National Black College Alumni Hall of Fame. We're based in Atlanta. We are a nonprofit organization, and we really focus on driving change for HBCUs. So we serve as a catalyst and a partner to really focus on the sustainability of HBCUs, the excellence of HBCUs, but also the recognition of the institutions and their alumni. And so I'm really proud to serve as the executive director for that, since I am an HBCU graduate. Additionally, I am the CEO and founder of Gabb Consulting. So we are a small boutique consultancy focused on social impact. So we work with corporations and philanthropies and even individuals and cities and governments to really look through and decide and create impact strategies that really drive social change. But then, and more importantly, like telling them, what they can do to really shape the narrative and tell a better story around their impact. So between the work I do with HBCUs from the Hall of Fame perspective and the work I do with Gabb Consulting, I really focus again on really legacy building and driving change within the historically Black universities and the Black community, but then also creating strategies to help drive impact in other aspects around philanthropy and corporations.
Well, you definitely have your hands in a lot of things. And you particularly have had a wide-ranging career across different sectors, from higher education to global consumer brands. So can you tell us a little bit about some of your early experiences or even the mentors who influenced the values that guide your work today?
Yeah, I would say really it started with my family. I think that family value that my parents instilled and my family instilled around education, again, looking at things from an equity perspective. So really, if I have a sense of responsibility for my community. So my success is not just my success, but it's, something that I'm focused on helping to build my family and my community around me. And then I think also just really looking at how I can continue to help those behind me. That was something that my family really instilled in us, and actually a really deep sense of faith as well. So those are kind of the core principles that we were instilled upon when we were younger. And then as I went on, another experience I would say, or really outside of the family, was my HBCU experience, clearly. Hence why I really love my opportunity and the work that we're doing at the Hall of Fame. I went to Lincoln University, which is the first degree granting historically Black university. We're based in Pennsylvania. But what the beauty of Lincoln University is that a lot of our students, and I say our students because I serve on the foundation board for the university, so a lot of our students are first generation college goers, myself included. So when I stepped on that campus, it really was like I found a community of like-minded individuals who really had the same background and experience that I had, kind of the same goals, but maybe didn't really have that sense of community that they could find maybe back home or with their family. So it really is a transformative experience, and I think that really helped shape my mindset of what I really want to do going forward from a future perspective. So we had wonderful faculty and staff that really exposed us to new ways of thinking. And then I think the legacy of Lincoln and most historically Black colleges and universities, right? We graduated Thurgood Marshall, but we also graduated Nnamdi Azikiwe. We graduated Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of Ghana. Nnamdi Azikiwe was the first president of Nigeria. But to really matriculate through a university where these individuals attended and then went on and became global change makers, I think that really instilled in us the ability to do anything, right? We could do the same. And so I think that's kind of when the light bulb went off to say, okay, I can match my purpose with some of the work that I want to do, or my passions and drive with some of the work that I want to do.
Yeah, just listening to just the joy I hear in your voice as you talk about your passion and you talk about your purpose, I can see why you will be doing what you're doing now. So was there a particular moment, or what was the moment when you knew it was time to take the leap and build something of your own?
That moment came twice. So I'll tell you, this isn't my first time going into entrepreneurship. I started off in a corporate career. Well, I started off at Lincoln and then followed into a corporate career. So I've always worked for a organization or a corporation. But my time at Discover Financial Services when I first launched into entrepreneurship. At that time, I was really just focused on marketing and really business to consumer marketing and mainly business to business marketing. But it didn't tie, again, that passion of, advancing equity and creating opportunity that I talked about before. And so at that point, I realized there was something missing and that I could do a little bit more with my work around marketing and communications and storytelling. So I took my first jump and leap into entrepreneurship. And it was pretty, successful. We had some great clients. I started out with a partner at that time. And we really got introduced into supplier diversity when we had a client that we were working on a project with where they were focused on doing DEI and tourism. So they would do an annual conference around DEI and tourism, and there was a track and some opportunities around supplier diversity and really bringing diverse owned businesses into tourism and spotlighting those. And that's when I first learned about supplier diversity. And that kind of launched my career at HP, or kind of helped me transition to HP. So I went back to corporate because I realized there was some opportunity for me to learn a little bit more about this space and get better acclimated with what's going on and really sharpen my skills. And then also, entrepreneurship is tough. And so sometimes you need the additional funding and the consistency of cash flow. And so I went back to corporate America. And I led HP's procurement communications, but as well as their supplier diversity program. And then my career kind of transitioned into focusing specifically on supplier diversity. And I think that's where I really understood, like, okay, this is where I want to play and this is what I can do. And I continued on supplier diversity for a little bit, but then as we started launching racial equity commitments, I was fortunate enough to launch the racial equity commitments for HP. And then transition onto Estée Lauder companies and really lead their racial equity commitments around supplier diversity. I still realized that there was opportunity to have a more holistic approach and look at things from not just my space as supplier diversity, but how do I make sure I work with the foundation, at a company to make sure that they're looking at diverse suppliers and maybe supporting some organizations that focus on diverse owned businesses, or maybe from a marketing perspective, how do I tie that into, making sure that they're working with diverse owned agencies or other things. So I think when we looked at it across the board, there were still gaps that I felt like my consultancy can solve for. Because most of the time when organizations and or entities look at creating these solutions, they may have siloed solutions, and then those teams don't necessarily work together collaboratively and maybe share those goals. And so I wanted to encourage my clients to not only have maybe primary goals, but secondary goals, and those secondary goals are across different sectors.
Right, right. And you mentioned a number of those major corporations you worked in, Discover, HP, and Estée Lauder, particularly the supplier diversity kind of relationships you built with the procurement. So what helped you get the buy-in across those departments and encourage new ways of thinking? Because, some of the things you just mentioned, it was like, I'm sure that was not part of the traditional way of doing business then. So what made you take that leap even there while you were still in corporate to encourage these new ways of looking at procurement?
Yeah, and that's change management. And change management can always be tough. I think, luckily enough, the corporations I worked for, the leadership already kind of set that as a priority. So the buy-in wasn't so hard, but it was still about educating and equipping our leaders to lead this change. Because I think we all had a commitment and a goal, and we made those proud, loud commitments. And, I'm really proud of the companies I've worked for because they were leaders in those spaces, especially Estée Lauder companies was one of the few beauty companies to make a public commitment to increase their spend with Black-owned businesses and diverse-owned businesses. But I still had to, like you said, navigate that because they were large, complex institutions and enterprises. So it really did start at the top, and like, how do I educate and kind of prepare our leaders to speak about our commitments around supplier diversity and really help them understand what it means. We had a goal, and I think really being clear on that goal was super important in the very beginning, creating a timeline for that goal. So we made a public commitment, for instance, to double our spend with Black-owned businesses at Estée Lauder companies by 2023. I'm excited to share by the time I left, we did exceed that expectation. So we reached 43 million in spend with Black-owned businesses by 2022. But it really started with the top and equipping our leaders with the right, ways to lead through that change. But then when we drilled it down, then it was like, okay, we set the goal. We kind of had the demand, and now we kind of had to meet the supply, find the supply to meet the demand. So we had to go out and find those Black-owned businesses. And I think that was really crucial in the beginning too. It's like, now when we're making this announcement that this is the direction we're going toward, how do we partner with the right organizations to find the right Black-owned businesses for our needs? And I think that's really, really important when you're having any type of change, is really aligning, what you need specifically with what, or finding what you need to align what the overall goal is. So we partnered with quite a few organizations that can help us identify diverse suppliers, but especially Black-owned businesses in areas, specifically what we call indirect procurement. So around professional services and marketing and, our facilities management, because one, there was a high demand, in those areas, but there was also a high supply in those areas. Those were where there were Black-owned businesses, and I think that's really important for supplier diversity in general. You have to be honest and take an assessment to see where Black-owned businesses exist. So I think when I was doing supplier diversity at the time, I think maybe 20% of certified minority-owned businesses were in the professional services area. And that's partially by no mistake. Other areas outside of that, there takes a lot more capital to get started. And so it's easier to kind of enter into those types of businesses. And so that's where we focus. We focus where there are actually businesses. And then we started to work throughout the organization to match those businesses to the needs. So we started finding decision makers who were looking for marketing agencies and facilities management, firms or things like that. And I think really selling the capabilities of these suppliers was so super important. So back to the storytelling, we would do spotlights and highlights. We would do meet and greets and sessions and help them kind of tell their story in a better way. We would help them share their capabilities. And then I think also we really focus. And when I say we, it was me and my team. And so, I never want to take credit for it, only doing this. This was a team effort. But we really wanted to make sure that we talked to the different decision makers to see what the opportunities were, but then also outside of where they, maybe where there were other opportunities outside of where they were working. So maybe we had a supplier that was working with, let's say, Mac. We might want to introduce them to Aveda because Mac said they're doing a great job. And so I think sharing the stories and opening them up to the enterprise really made us successful in that way. And I'm a big proponent in we want to do right by who we already had in our supply base. We want to grow those suppliers. Before we can bring in new suppliers, we want to do a good job to say we actually grew the suppliers that we had. And I can say we did do a great job in doing that. We introduced them to both procurement, decision makers, but also the enterprise decision makers. And I think, of course, your typical metrics and KPIs and tracking and building it into your procurement strategy, it's super significant and important, but those were really the steps that made it successful. So it was a lot of relationship building in the beginning, I can say, and then just really getting folks internally to buy in, and then supporting the diverse suppliers to really get better integrated into our enterprise.
Yeah, you really speak to the numerous steps involved in really not only accessing capital, which I want to just hone in on there for a minute, because that's one of the greatest barriers. And so, in addition to finding out, diverse suppliers, it's access to capital for these businesses to be able to even be in the running for the work. And so, even launching your own firm after being in the corporate world, I imagine you had a lot of logistics and other things to get through. But what was your experience like yourself for accessing capital? Was it straightforward, which I'm sure it wasn't, but what were some unexpected hurdles that you encountered?
Yeah. And so, as I mentioned, this is the second time. And I think the first time, I realized I needed more of a nest. And so I'm fortunate enough to launch in a space and an industry that is not, doesn't require a lot of overhead and a lot of capital, right? So I think I'm lucky enough to be able to self-fund because of my corporate career, and I realize that many entrepreneurs maybe don't have that privilege that I do. But because I went into a professional services industry where there's low overhead, it was easier for me this second time because for the first time I realized, okay, I probably need around this nest to get started and understanding how cash flow works. And so I would say there aren't many other, there could be other industries that may be a little bit more prohibitive for folks to get started. So even when I mentioned, we really focus on those industries from a supplier diversity perspective, where there are a plethora of diverse suppliers, because if we went and looked maybe for a Black-owned lipstick manufacturer that can meet a high demand, it's highly likely that we wouldn't find them because that takes a lot more money to build up that type of manufacturing company. So, even in my starting this, I realize I'm fortunate my cost to entry is a lot lower, but there are still some folks who I recognize may not have the privilege I have. I was talking to one of our clients, and we were talking about another potential partner that they were going to bring in, and even just insurance can be a problem for some small businesses and diverse businesses. And while in my field, insurance may not be that much, it could be between $100 to $150 to $200 a month, and you might think that may not be a lot, but there are many businesses where that could be a lot for them. And so I think when you're preparing to start a business, especially as an entrepreneur, taking into consideration all those little things that you have to have in place to really make the business successful is really, really important. And then I think that can help you understand where you would want to launch. And it doesn't mean that's where you end. Maybe one day I will open up a lipstick manufacturing company based on how I grow with this consultancy. But I think those are things to take into consideration before you start, because there is not as much access to capital, and then not many are as privileged to start from a corporate background.
You've named some of the disconnects between access to capital and some of the kind of steps new entrepreneurs need to take to get there. From your perspective, are there some things that you think could change? We know that based on the industry, costs are different, but are there some general things that you think could change to make it easier for new businesses starting out, accessing capital, and really just getting a solid footing?
Yeah, I think I would say from the entrepreneur perspective, I think maybe it's perspective for both. Maybe if I can say that, for an entrepreneur, I think especially when you're looking to get access to capital, or if you're in need of capital to get started, um, back to, you kind of said what drove you. I think most entrepreneurs start out with looking for solving for a need or an opportunity, and usually it's a personal one, hence, my consultancy. And so usually when they're looking for funding, they're speaking from that sense of passion where they're solving for the need and the opportunity. And I think they do a great job in telling the passion and the story behind that. But usually what funders are looking for is, scalability, growth, how can they see a return on their investment? And so I think there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to be able to tell that story. But then I think from a funder side of things, I think, it's also kind of being a little bit more flexible to understand and be willing to fund different types of enterprises or businesses that are just getting started out, realizing that there are barriers. There may not be, great credit on their side, or they may not be able to tell the story in the way that they need to tell to get the right funding. And so I think it's really helping to look at, like, what does scalability look like? What is something that's worth investing in? I think also realizing that there could be some type of support systems in place for these types of businesses that can help them with the operations or better, scaling and growing their businesses. So I think maybe it's a perspective of, like, one, how do you switch your story to make it where it's an actual business, and not just focus on vision and mission, or, the drive and the passion that you have. But I think from a funder perspective, it's kind of meeting businesses where they are to realize that they may not have the skills and ability to best tell how it can scale, but doesn't mean that it's not going to happen.
So, do you think there are any models or that you're aware of national or locally that could do this or help kind of both kind of navigate this gap in between
Yeah,
telling the story and getting the data and necessary kind of metrics that a funder will be looking for?
yeah, I think I'll give you an example. My best friend, she's based out in Pittsburgh, and she just started her own catering company. She actually has a cafe and a catering service, a catering company. And so she services, and it's a Black owned business. She went to Lincoln University. So again, back to that first generation college goer. And, entrepreneurship is something new to her. But, her city, the city of Pittsburgh, has many resources that, one, focus on helping businesses get certified so they can have that designation of a minority women-owned business, but also funding them. And so there was a workshop she went through to help her really build out her business plan, and tell the story of, like, how she can grow. But then they gave her the actual funding, so they supported her in getting a physical space because they intentionally wanted to see more Black businesses, and especially Black women businesses, in the downtown area of Pittsburgh. And I think from there it was also consistent connections to other networks and other organizations that support these types of businesses. So again, minority owned businesses, women owned businesses, but brick and mortar businesses in the city of Pittsburgh. And I think from there, she's been able to be successful. Now she's still looking for more traditional ways of, besides just getting grants and getting that support, more traditional ways of funding. And she's still navigating that. And they have been supportive in helping her. Because, what you do see a lot of times is there are businesses that are getting started and they still have to fully dedicate, especially, she has a restaurant pretty much. And so, that takes some money, and it has inventory, and it takes some time to see a return on that investment. So she does have to still work full time and also self fund while she's doing her business. And you'll see that a lot. But I think what I do see around cities is the supports to really, again, help with a resource development perspective and a human resource development perspective with helping around any technologies that she's had and things like that, but then also giving her the capital to help her grow. And I would say, like, even I have seen some great things from, I was living in Detroit before I moved back home to Brooklyn. And last year we had the privilege I was in the Metro Detroit area. We had the privilege to host the Super Bowl or sorry, the NFL draft. I wish we would have hosted the Super Bowl in Detroit. I'd be back there. But we had the chance to host the NFL draft, and it was a phenomenal turnout. I think, it was record breaking in the turnout that it had. But what I saw the NFL and the city of Detroit and the community do really, really well is understand their population. Detroit, I think, is over 75% Black, and own that and be authentic and leaning into their community and who they are. And part of the website that they had and the promotions that they did were things like promoting the Black-owned businesses in the area and the small-owned businesses in the area, especially restaurants that you should visit. So they really leaned into their community to tell a story, and that helped, and then helped those businesses prepare for the influx of visitors that they would be having. And I think that's when you see it done right, when you see like an NFL and a Detroit and the community come together to have a good economic impact and experience. And then the results speak for itself, again, with the record-breaking attendees that attended the NFL draft. I think you see things like that, and it's hopeful and inspiring to see people doing it right from a collaboration across sectors perspective.
Yeah, you've really highlighted the work we do, even at Living Cities, where those partnerships, we are member collaborative, philanthropy, financial institutions, working with local government. And so we know the value of partnerships and how much more successful they are, especially when you involve the community. So shifting gears here a little bit, I know when you were talking about your family background and just the focus on education and legacy. I wanted to just take a look at that again, your work with the National Black College Alumni Hall of Fame. So again, congratulations on just that amazing role. I've definitely had a lot of family members at HBCUs, even now, too, just started. But what drew you to this role, and what are you hoping to accomplish during your time there?
Oh, I mean, I love everything HBCU. So I think I don't think there's ever been a conversation where I'm not talking maybe about an HBCU or at least my HBCU, Lincoln. And so the fact that it's serving this population was really near and dear to my heart. And then I learned about the founder, Tommy Dortch, who just seemed like the most genuine leader that there was. Unfortunately, I never had a chance to meet him. He passed away 2 years ago, but the impact that he had on our community and society in general, it was something that I wanted to continue the legacy for. I'm excited to come in on our 40th anniversary. So, they were founded in 1985 and really started around honoring the legacy and recognizing the work around notable HBCU alumni. And I think that's great that there's a space that can do that. And that really heralds the stories of these incredible graduates. And so our theme this year is 40 years strong, legacy built, legacy rising. And I think that legacy rising part really is what spoke to me, is that I could be a part of building on the next 40 years, and looking at what that legacy means beyond what was built. And so some of the things that I really am focusing on is how do we, build the infrastructure to, again, advance for the next 40 years? How do we establish new corporate and community partners to get, our energy and resources and time and talent mobilized around preserving and maintaining these institutions, advancing students, and telling the incredible impact and recognizing the legacy of the alumni. And so that's what we were really focused on right now, is it's strengthening our programs to make sure that we have the right impact and expand that reach to 40 more years to come.
Yeah, that's excellent. And it makes me think about so many people are questioning education because of the cost now. But you've just named earlier, country presidents who have come out of Lincoln, and a number of other amazing legacy students, and including yourself. But what makes you think colleges like Lincoln and other HBCUs so critical to the fabric of leadership and innovation in our country?
Yeah, I think these institutions are really like a breeding ground for innovation and creativity and culture. They're still relevant. We are producing some of the greatest leaders, right? I think to your point, we're not just producing graduates or workers. We are really producing leaders and global change makers still to this day. And I think that's what a historically Black college and or university really focuses on is, academic excellence for sure. But I think it's surface. So back to what I'd said my parents instilled in me is like, you have this responsibility to the community. Universities, especially HBCUs, I think really instill that in their students and even in their graduates because it's a continuous engagement. We still engage alumni after that, and there's still the homecoming. And so you are a Lincoln person for life, or an HBCU graduate for life, and it's a lifelong commitment. And so I think that's why it's significantly important is like how do you put back into the community and not just community society. But I think another thing that, most HBCU graduates will tell you is like it is really an affirming space. I think, you leave with this self assuredness and affirmation that allows you to be able to make change in a society where you may not feel like you can. And so it does give you the confidence to go out and have an impact. And I think that is also what's really important about HBCUs. And not even just for graduates. I think there are folks who are not a part of the HBCU community who haven't graduated from one who will come on those campuses and feel that same type of energy and being ingrained in the culture and walk away feeling like they have a commitment to make to advance the community. So, I think that's the value of those institutions. Mm-hmm. The academic excellence is the legacy, but it's that commitment to advancing, the next generation forward.
Yeah, I love how you talked about the affirmation and self-assuredness you come in with and leave with,
yes.
Even more. So over the course of your career, you stepped into spaces I'm sure that weren't always welcoming. And I know that's part of even at the Hall of Fame that, you share with students and alumni and, people share their stories. What advice would you give to young professionals looking to carve out their own lane, especially when the road ahead feels uncertain, especially now?
Right. I know. I will say to young, it's going to always be uncertain. And so, don't let this time discourage you. But I would say the advice that I would give and what I've always tried to do is really lean in and own your story. And so I think the storytelling starts with you and understanding what your story is. I've always tried to own every part of me. I'm, Black girl from Flatbush, Brooklyn in the 80s and 90s. And I try to really own that and bring, parts of her to any corporate room that I'm in or any board that I serve on. But I've also, went to junior high school and high school in the Poconos. And that's a whole nother side of me that I own and realize that there's value in. And I've studied in, China, and there's an experience there. And so I would say I really encourage people, these experiences are not by chance, and that's what makes you unique. So own those unique parts of you and never quiet those parts of you when you are in different rooms, regardless of what room you're in, because that's the value that you bring, and that's usually the perspective that's missing, and that's why you're at the table or in the room. So I really encourage folks own every part of you and show up authentically.
Love that. Love that. So, what are you still learning on your journey?
Oh my goodness. I think I'm still learning. I do not know everything, but apparently my 5-year-old niece does. No, but I think I'm still learning. Yeah, she's my counselor, and but I'm still learning. Yeah, I don't know everything, and I'm okay with that. And I think that's the beauty of having a team and building the right team around you. And I think I'm still learning patience the work that I'm doing, if we talk about advancing equity, creating opportunity, driving change, it's the long term. It's for the long haul. And while I would love to see things change overnight, I may not live to see it, and I think being okay with that and being patient and pacing myself, I'm still learning to do that, still very much.
I love that. So, for listeners who want to begin leading with more purpose, what's one step they can take today?
Leading with purpose. I think the way you can intentionally lead with purpose is more so just doing what you love. I think when you do the work you love, something you could wake up and read about all day and talk about all day, or what keeps you up at night and you're solutioning for that, where you can go down the rabbit hole for, that type of work. If it's what you love, you naturally emerge as a leader with purpose. You can see the passion, you can, and that's what attracts others to follow you, because they believe in you and they see that you're committed to it. So I encourage folks to really take the time to find what they love. I think of athletes. I had a chance to meet Cassie Russell this past week, and he played for the Knicks in the 60s, and he's 81 years old, and when he talks about the game, he talks as if he was playing yesterday. And he remembers every stat. He remembers the quarter. He remembers who was on a fast break down, the court. He remembers who he passed the ball to. And I'm like, how does he remember that? He was doing what he loved. And so it's natural to him. And then you're drawn into him and you can see his leadership. And so I think that's really what I encourage folks to do, is do what you love, and you'll naturally lead.
Thank you for calling out a Knicks player.
Yeah.
New York. Myself, it's like, the diehard.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
New Yorker all day.
Right, exactly. So we're going to end with a quick little lightning round here. So just give me some fast answers here. A book or podcast that shaped your thinking?
Oh, I love Trevor Noah. I adore Trevor Noah. And so his podcast, What's Next? And I think I adore him because he really has a genuine curiosity for people and has an eagerness to really learn people that don't think like him and understand people that don't think like him. So What's Next? Trevor Noah.
Absolutely. What's a daily ritual or habit that keeps you grounded?
Gratitude. I wake up every day and thank God. I literally wake up every day and pray, and I'm grateful for another day that I get to do something to make a difference.
One unforgettable moment in your career?
The moment they let me know I was appointed to the Lincoln University Foundation Board. Mm-hmm. That was so meaningful and impactful for me, and I was really honored to be able to serve on this foundation for a university that shaped me and made me the woman I am.
One word that defines your mission right now?
I think mobilizing, or mobilize. I think that's the word.
And finally, what final thought would you leave with our listeners as they reflect on this episode?
Back to mobilize. I hope to encourage folks, if they, listen in. We used to say something at Estée, saying that you can lead from every chair. And so I think, as we think about closing a wealth gap and solving for some of these issues, yes, corporations and philanthropies and cities have a responsibility, but so do we. We have the opportunity to make the change. And so I think if you can lead from your chair as a person and lead from your chair in your professional space, but I encourage you to really see what you can do from the seats you sit in to, as my chairman at Lincoln University would say, to donate your time, your talent, and your treasury, your money. Donate those things. I really encourage every listener here to kind of take that on and see how they can do that from the chair that they sit in. With those three things, your time, your talent, and your treasury, I think we would be in a far better place if we all took that ownership and that responsibility and worked together to do that.
Ashley, thank you for such an energizing and insightful conversation. Your leadership, your journey, and the work you're doing continue to inspire and inform. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Live with Living Cities. We're grateful to have you alongside us as we explore what it takes to build thriving communities and reimagine what's possible. If this conversation sparked something for you, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share the episode with others on their journey of building better systems. To learn more or get involved, visit livingcities.org. And if your organization is interested in partnering with us or becoming a part of our network, reach out anytime at lcinfo@livingcities.org. Our heartfelt thank you to all of our partners and supporters. Your commitment makes this work possible. Until next time, I'm Valerie McDowell, and this has been Live with Living Cities.